Hey everyone, welcome to Our Soft Machine, the podcast about mental health in the everyday. I'm Sebastian, and joining me today is not my usual co host Andrew, as he is away at this moment. But I didn't want to leave you guys hanging like last time, so I ventured to make a recording on my own. So, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Kim, and I've been a nurse for about 6 years.
Fantastic, good to meet you. And thank you for joining us today. Well, joining me.
Absolutely.
So today's episode, I kind of bounced around some ideas. And I had this idea of mental health and New Year's for some reason. I don't know, maybe like, or New Year's resolutions specifically. And so I was reading this article about a list of 10 New Year's resolutions you can make for your mental health. And that got me thinking when I was reading through them, oh, this is just kind of describing self-care stuff, or what you would call in the therapy field self-care. Now, again, unfortunately, with how Andrew, there does seem to be a very specific definition of self-care. So please do understand we are going to take a pretty broad, almost colloquial definition of self-care today. And Kim, I'm relying on you to kind of help me stay within the confines of that.
I'll do my best.
Okay, so self-care. What is it?
Well, I think it's giving yourself the same care that you're willing to give other people is, in summary, would be my automatic go-to definition.
When I first hear self-care, I think of I forget the name of the character, but she goes with Aziz Ansari in Parks and Recreation, and they have this mantra of treat yourself. And that's the first thing I think of when I hear self-care. And I think a lot of people that's the definition that they have, which isn't completely wrong.
No.
But like you said, a better modified definition would be giving people the same level of care, or giving yourself the same level of care that you would give other people.
Mm-hmm.
So with treat yourself comes almost a sense of overindulgence. And by no means would you impress upon someone like, yes, I think you should overindulge. No, you would tell them like, I think you should, maybe watch an episode of something, but not binge. So, that's where we have to be careful of our definition of self-care, which is why I liked the definition that you gave me so much.
Yes, and I think it has more to do about being compassionate and giving yourself the same benefits you would give someone else in a similar situation. Rather than giving yourself anything additional, I think it's treating yourself as a flawed human that deserves compassion and understanding, just like you would ideally treat another person.
Yeah. And I think where Kim is getting these sort of, we're going to have a few buzzwords here in this episode. Obviously self-care is going to be one of them. I believe mindfulness might be one.
Yes.
Self-awareness will be one, and compassion will be one, along with sort of along the same lines, empathy. And these are coming from some studies that, as always, we will link in the description. You can see all the sources that we reference. But where would you like to start? I usually, whenever I am co-hosting with Andrew, I'll kind of go through my articles and go down the list, even though we probably would be better to sort of jump around, and we can do that as well. But I think you had something that I really enjoyed, and that was you had self-care kind of broken down.
Yes. So, reading these studies, one article I really liked broke self-care down into 4 components, or 4 areas of life that you would need self-care in. The best definitions of areas of self-care that I read about were into 4 sections. One was psychological self-care. The other was spiritual self-care, then physical self-care, and support self-care. Would you like me to just briefly go over these 4 sections?
Give us a quick rundown.
Okay, my definition of psychological would be dealing with stress and challenges. That kind of, to me, was the summary of self-care, dealing with stressors in your life, whatever they are, in an adaptive way, as opposed to dealing with them in a not so adaptive way, in a maladaptive way. So things like meditation or self-awareness would all be good ways of coping with mental stress. Things like drinking or trying to ignore the problem would all be bad ways of coping with that.
So it's dealing with the basically where you are mentally and emotionally.
And kind of changing how you think about a situation or changing your mental state at any one point to help you move forward. The second one was spiritual. This could include religion, or it could just include how you view yourself and your role in the world, how you get meaning from what you do. So if you feel like what you're doing has meaning, that goes a long way into not becoming fatigued or burned out, and to feel like you're doing something worthy with your life.
Reading that study, I did like how they kind of admitted there was some difficulty to defining some forms of self-care. One of them being spiritual. Basically, they admitted we have to kind of make this as broad as possible to include religion and to include anybody's idea of what spirituality is. But there is, I think, because of the uniqueness of what we refer to as the human condition, that is our own self-awareness of our mortality. Spirituality is a distinct part of our well-being, away from, it might be tempting to call that psychological, but it's kind of hard to explain why it's distinct. Maybe through an example you could tell us why that these two parts are so distinctive.
So if you go to work every day thinking that your job doesn't matter in the big picture, thinking that your life won't make a difference, thinking that what you do every day doesn't matter, then I think that's incredibly disheartening, and it does cause you to burn out. It gives you some sense of hopelessness.
So find a better job. Easy.
Yeah, so everyone who doesn't feel fulfilled, just quit your jobs now.
Yeah, switch jobs. Just do whatever you've been thinking about. Make pizza, whatever it is. Done. All right, next.
Thanks.
No. But no, we're definitely going to tackle the whole quick fix situations. Especially, we might allude some to our previous social media episode.
And I don't think it necessarily has to be meaning in a job. I mean, you can find meaning by volunteering somewhere, by being a positive part of a young person's life. There's many, many ways you can find meaning by making your coworkers' lives better. There's just a lot of different things you can do to create meaning in your life. It doesn't have to be a 24/7 thing, but if you feel like your life has meaning and value to the world and the bigger picture, whatever you see that as, I think that can definitely give you some peace or some encouragement.
Okay, so psychological and spiritual can sort of blend into each other.
They can.
So we have psychological, we have spiritual. What else do we have?
Physical. That's actually much easier to define. That would be physical exercise, sleep, and diet. So if you are sleeping 7 to 8 hours a day and you have good sleep hygiene, that's...
You are in the minority, probably.
You are. You definitely are.
Congratulations. And screw you, as the majority of Americans.
A good job on resisting the urge to procrastinate and stay up and look at screens late.
Whoa, hold on. I told you not to get too personal.
Yeah, I'm not great at that one either. The other one is exercise. For mild to moderate depression, exercise is seen on par with some antidepressants. So it works just as well as some antidepressants for mild to moderate depression.
And I believe this study reference several studies, and there have been several studies that have kind of reached the same conclusion, which is why I do my best to try and pick the materials for this show, and that's what I did like about this particular study. It references a lot of what it's saying is based on several studies or established studies. Now, that said, one of the key things that Kim said here was mild depression or stress.
This is like when people tell you to use St. John's wort for depression. It works sometimes for mild depression, does not work for major depressive disorder, does not work for severe depression, does not work for most types of moderate depression. There are limits to everything. However, this used in conjunction with something else can be extremely helpful for many reasons.
Yeah, and exercise can definitely, it's hard to tell someone that their exercise routine has gotten to a point of being maladaptive. But again, we'll get to that point of what we're talking about. And just to kind of speed up the pace here, I'm going to go ahead and say, let's go ahead and talk about the last one.
Support. That would be your relationships with other people. Again and again in these studies, social support was incredibly important in self-care and in promoting self-care. It helps decrease anxiety, which is a huge contributor of depression and other mental illnesses as well. But social support shows up again and again as extremely important in self-care, being able to have people who are willing to listen to you, empathize with you, you don't feel so alone. A lot of mental illnesses feel very isolating, and social support helps with that aspect of it.
Sorry, I'm ruffling some papers here.
Yes, you are.
A lot of noise, which I told you not to do.
I know.
Okay, so support and social is what we might call community and relationships.
Yes.
So when talking about self-care, what causes us to need it? And why is this like such a buzzword? And I will admit that it is a little bit limited scope in which we are discussing this. A lot of these studies seem to be centered around people in caregiver roles, which is good because you are a nurse, so this gives us some insight into that. And also very strictly into therapeutic roles, so psychiatrists, social workers, therapists, counselors, people of that nature. But again, I think a lot of what they experience, like vicarious trauma, having to be empathetic with people, that's a lot of things in your nursing role that's expected of you. Not that you're sitting down for an hour and listening to people, but you are expected to show compassion, empathy for your patients, I would imagine. So, I think in our everyday lives, just to kind of associate with that, for example, as something as what seemingly mundane as working in retail, you are expected to be objective, shield your emotions, and to have a certain demeanor of people. When a customer is irate or upset, you're expected to sympathize with them, even if it's just putting on a face, and resolve their problem and help them. And so I think in a lot of jobs, that deals with people, there is a lot of us sort of giving up ourselves or giving up a part of ourselves, not to the extent of what you are doing, of course, but we need a refresher from that. And even from a physical labor standpoint, I mean, we just, not only can it be physically taxing, it can still sometimes be mentally taxing, depending, sometimes even working with coworkers, dealing with certain people, dealing with family, maybe in your personal life, you have somebody who has brain damage or has had a stroke or has a physical impairment. And again, you cannot slip. You have to show compassion, understanding. So there are many areas of life that, even though these studies were focused on caregivers in a clinical setting, where we give a part of ourselves like that. We have to show compassion. We have to show empathy. and that can take a toll on us. And so we'd like to discuss that for a second. So what were your findings when you were reading some of those studies and articles?
So there are some good summaries here of what it is and who needs it. But one thing I did want to mention was people who are in a relationship with someone who has a mental illness, or people who have family who are ill, or at some point, most of us will be caregivers, and we will have to deal with some kind of compassion fatigue. So this had a couple quotes I thought were good. So it says, "There is a cost to caring for those with chronic illnesses, just as there is a realization that these clients will never fully recover." Taking care of parents, again, people with chronic mental illnesses, it's hard when there's not a nice, pretty end date when someone gets all better. And defining compassion fatigue. The very act of being compassionate and empathetic extracts a cost under most circumstances. In our effort to view the world from the perspective of the suffering, we suffer. The meaning of compassion is to bear suffering. When it's phrased like that, it's easy to see why compassion fatigue exists. We are literally taking on the suffering of other people in order to lessen their suffering. It's what you do when a friend is having a difficult time, when they've lost your job. It feels better for them to be able to share the burden, and in that, you do take on the burden. So discussing compassion fatigue kind of helps take away some of the stigma, because it's easy to get burned out and then to feel guilty about it. And then everyone's burned out and feeling guilty, and that does not lead to healthy dynamics and doesn't help you continue to be a caregiver and continue to be compassionate with difficult circumstances or difficult people.
Now, arguably, feeling burned out and yet still feeling guilty wouldn't necessarily be compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue to me sounds like you get to a point where it's hard for you to even care, to the point of guilt.
That's true. That's true. Burned out, it does make a difference. Burned out is when you just feel like you're exhausted, you're tired, which definitely can be a component of compassion fatigue. But compassion fatigue is specifically feeling like you're out of compassion, like you don't have the empathy you should. Yeah. Knowing a person's continued problems or difficulties, you just don't feel like you have any more compassion to care.
Right. And understanding that the goal here and the goal of these studies was not to have solutions for when we reach that point. The entire point is to help us avoid reaching that point with self-care and showing ourselves the same compassion that we show these people in our lives. And I really like the first bit that you said, and I just want to read it again. "There is a cost of caring to those with chronic illness, just as there is a realization that these clients will never fully recover." Now replace the word client with friend, sibling, parent,
spouse.
My partner, she suffers from, I'll just generally call it anxiety. And I can sometimes lose it with her, almost in an accusing way, like I'm being messed with. Most of the time I've learned to, in growing with my non-co-host, I've learned to be understanding, to know that this is just kind of how their mind works. But sometimes I'll get frustrated, and like I will literally say something as dumb as, "Dude, I can't understand why you can't just chill sometimes." And intellectually, I know exactly why. And it's because that's how her brain is. And I'm not making it any better by doing this. And humans are just very poor at looking at the big picture. And it's hard to keep in mind, like, this is likely how she will be the rest of her life. There will be, she has a control over it. She's far better than she was in childhood and adolescent years. But there will always be this residual bit of anxiety that's never going to go away, that's going to creep up in some way or another, because that is how her mind reacts to things. It seems small, but it's something like that. It's a realization that she will never fully recover. Now, this isn't the same as realizing
they're never going to
they're
get
never
better.
going to. Again, I'm trying to make this applicable to your everyday life. If you understand that, you can understand where a person is coming from and where they are, and B, you can take it a little bit easier on yourself as well, knowing that as helpless and powerless as you feel, that's okay sometimes, because sometimes you just have to let this ride it out. You can help the person, and what my response should be is there something we could do? Could I give you a massage? Do you want to watch a funny episode of something? Is there something I could help you with? But at a certain point, if she tells me, no, it's fine. I know I'm being ridiculous. I'm very anxious about this. Sometimes I know I just have to let her ride it out. And I just have to be right there with her to ride it out with her.
And I think that's one thing people sometimes don't always get is with chronic mental illnesses like anxiety, like depression, like bipolar or schizophrenia, these things are chronic. So think of them like you would any other chronic disease, like lupus, like anything else that has a physical, like an obvious visual sign of illness. We don't think of mental illnesses that way, but it's exactly like any other illness. It will wax and wane, and as time goes on, hopefully they will be better at managing it. But there will be times when it gets worse and it gets better. And your goal as either a spouse or a friend or a sibling is not to fix it, because no one can fix something like that. Your goal is to help them manage and to help them be better at managing. And I think that when you take away the need to fix something can be very freeing, because it's an inherent part of the person that they have that predisposition. So you don't need to fix it. You need to be there next to them to help them manage it. So I think when someone has something like depression, we want to jump in and fix it. Well, that's not quite how that works. But having someone next to you is an incredibly powerful thing, especially for a lot of these mental illnesses where isolation is one of the biggest feelings you have. I think with depression, there's an especially high incidence of that. People feel very isolated, even though it's one of the most common mental illnesses. And if you know that, if the ill person knows that they are not alone, that alone is an incredibly powerful thing you can do for them.
Raise your hand, everybody who knows somebody with lupus. Okay, that's...
Okay, well,
that's
okay.
about what I expected. So Andrew's favorite analogy is actually diabetes.
That makes more sense, yeah.
Because I think a good number of people know of someone at least who has diabetes. It is constant. It is not ever going to be like, it can get much, much, much better under control, even to the point of, in some cases, no longer needing medication, from my understanding.
Which is rare.
But it can happen.
Can.
Which I think is why it makes such a perfect analogy for some very depressive mood disorders, where again, you could possibly get to a point where you're off medication.
Yes.
But again, you're never fully recovered. This is something that you will always have.
You will always have to deal with the possibility of.
Yes.
Even if you've recovered from the acute stage of it.
Right. So if you're feeling even a little bit better, hopefully we've shot all hope out of you.
A very happy and fulfilling life is very possible and very likely. Depression is extremely treatable now. Thank you for that ray of sunshine. But it is something that you can never just become complacent and say, oh, that's never going to affect me again. But yes, I think the guilt of feeling bad about getting tired of caring for someone who's either difficult to deal with, or there's just a lot of problems, or the problems never end. It's exhausting, and there is a lot of guilt associated with that when there shouldn't be. But we're going to talk about a couple ways that you can help prevent that fatigue from setting in.
Yeah.
And those...
what do you call caregiver
fatigue.
or compassion fatigue.
Compassion fatigue, pardon me, which is often with caregivers.
Right.
I deal with a lot of caregivers in my job, and I have to help remind them after day 3, you should really go home and take a shower. Not just for sanitary reasons, but pretty much because if you haven't showered in 3 days, you don't have enough energy to do anything else. You haven't showered, you haven't slept.
Oh yeah, no. There's in one of these articles from either NAMI or MHA. There's one thing in here where it's talking about practicing self-care and things like that. One of the things it says is remember your hygiene. Like literally, that is something that and I was just like, wow. I guess it's hard to imagine that it gets to that point for some people. But yeah, it's literally like take a shower.
Take a shower once a day. Brush your teeth twice a day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it makes a big difference in how you feel overall. I mean, your mind and your body are very connected, and so if you don't feel physically good, then it's hard to feel mentally good.
Yeah.
But it is important. At the hospital, I'm constantly having to tell people who have family in there, I mean, the family's not going anywhere. They're still going to be here in 3 days. You need to go home, get some sleep, eat something, and come back. Because otherwise that caregiver fatigue will set in, and you need to be prepared for when you are going to be needed, which is when that patient is ready to go home. And I remember being at the family of someone very close to me who had a relative in the ICU, and they were doing this vigil thing where they stood at the bedside 24/7, and they had excellent doctors and nurses caring for the person, but I kept saying, this is not where you're necessarily needed. You need to be well rested, you need to have everything together, and you need to start looking ahead, because the hardest part is yet to come. Right now, you're sitting there and ready for news, and that's great, but what you need to be doing is doing self-care, getting yourself mentally ready for the long haul. When this person gets out and needs therapy and you need to deal with insurance, that's when you're needed. And it's hard to express that to people in a way where they feel like they can still contribute, because having someone sick is a very powerless feeling. But that self-care is needed, especially when a family's ill or when someone is sick. It's hard when you feel so powerless. But directing that into healthy actions can be very useful.
So I think when discussing caregiver fatigue, as far as something specific, what we're trying to say essentially is, if you're not taken care of by you, it's going to be incredibly difficult for you to take care of somebody else.
One of the studies we looked at did show that therapists who were not compassionate towards themselves were not very compassionate towards their patients. And I think there's a direct correlation with people who are not therapists as well. If you can't be compassionate with yourself and take care of yourself, you can't be expected to take care of other people with compassion. I think of it like a pitcher of water. If you're not filled up with self-care and compassion, how do you expect you'll be able to pour yourself out to other people to care for them and show them compassion if you have nothing even for yourself, or you're not filled up to be able to give?
So for people in caregiver situations, and again, it could be as something as dire as, caring for someone who is in physical rehab with, difficulty moving, someone with limited mental capacity, but it could also be someone having a spouse or a friend who comes to you when they're stressed or depressed, or even something as simple as being in retail. But for those of you that are in those really dire straits, just to touch on something psychological, one of the things we talked about earlier that I want to bring back is realizing that sometimes you're doing the best, you're doing the most of what you can do. And you really need to avoid guilt as much as you can. And so, and I know it feels like if you're not doing something all of the time, directing your energy at this, any time that you're not working or doing anything else, that you're letting this person down somehow. But it can help to get yourself out of that caregiver mode for even just for 5 minutes.
I do find that something important and necessary in my job. There's definitely an almost kind of wall you build, and you're still able to feel compassion for someone, you're still able to help them and to put yourself in their situation, but there has to be some kind of differentiation in your mind between yourself in a caregiver role and yourself as a person. And you can't only remember to treat yourself as a caregiver. It's hard to remember sometimes when so much of your time and energy is spent as a caregiver. But if you forget to treat yourself as a person too, and not just as a caregiver, then that's a recipe for burnout. You need to remember to, again, give yourself compassion that you give others. And that means taking care of yourself, dealing with stress appropriately, getting sleep, getting exercise, making sure you have a social network for yourself, and finding meaning. There are several support systems for caregivers as well. I believe Al-Anon is one of them for people who have friends or family that use drugs. There are definitely support groups for caregivers, and they help with that. They help prevent you from feeling so alone, and they help with sharing tips, with gaining comfort and finding social connections and people who understand the situation you're in. Again, I think that's one way you can support yourself as a person, is making these social connections, even over the very issue you're dealing with, because there are tips, there are ways to deal with it, and finding someone else in a situation does make it feel less lonely. So if you're in one of those situations, please reach out, look through the internet, see what local groups there are. It can definitely help.
And ask for help sometimes.
Right. Yes, don't be shy.
Ask someone, like, hey, I really need someone to take him to the appointment, because I can't get off work that day. Like, reach out to people, whether it be a sibling, whether it be your spouse, whether it be a friend, find that strength, and it's not even a point of pride sometimes. Sometimes we just forget who's around us.
Yes.
I think even when we're at work, we can forget that sometimes, to ask for help, to reach out to people and say, I'm having a really rough day. Maybe with you, it's like, sometimes you have to ask, like, could you give this patient their medications? Because I need to attend to this other patient who's very needy right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So find that strength in numbers. And as much as you can, notice the positive. I'm sure that's something you have to do with all the negative you see.
Oh, yes. People are both the best and the worst part of my job. And there are days I go home feeling terrible, and there are days I go home feeling absolutely elated.
Yeah. And, for some nurses, I know they're allowed little gifts and stuff. And I know some of them keep them almost as keepsakes, as reminders for those people that say thank you.
I keep every note that was ever written to me in my whole career. Those are the best.
Yeah. And that's what you have to hold on to, because understand people in the position of being cared for. Well, that's what you're trying to do. We're trying to understand them. And it is hard to be in a positive mindset where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And it can wear on you, which is why it's so important you remember those good times, those good moments.
And why you find things outside of that caregiving role
that make you feel normal.
Right.
Yeah.
Because, again, you're human outside of this, and you need to give yourself understanding that you would give any other human outside of that role.
Yeah.
Any other human under great stress and a lot of obligations. So there are some things here that talk about mindfulness and self-compassion. So mindfulness is, in my opinion, being self-aware and being in the here and now. I pass this quote every day at work, and it kind of makes me laugh because it's both inspiring and depressing at the same time. It says,
Let's hear it.
It says, the best thing about the future is that it comes one day at a time. And some days I'm like, well, that's depressing. The best you can say is that it's not too many days. But other days I'm like, you know what? That's true. I don't have to worry about 2 days from now. I just have to focus on tomorrow or just today.
Right, yeah.
And I think a lot of times our anxieties can see the future as overwhelming. And it is. I mean, thinking of caring for a sick family member for the next 5 years can feel very overwhelming. But it's kind of one day at a time, and not letting those anxieties build up is huge. Mindfulness and being aware of your feelings, of your anxieties, and also the good things in this moment can help a great deal. That's where meditation can come in. Meditation, one form of meditation is mindfulness, of having those thoughts come in and then letting those thoughts go. Rumination is a word that means focusing on negative thoughts and memories and playing those over in your head again and again. It's very linked with anxiety. And self-awareness, one component of that, is being aware of those, identifying those, and letting them go. It's easier said than done, but letting those thoughts pass through, acknowledging them, and moving past them, just being aware, self-aware enough that those are thoughts, that they're not all of reality, that those are past, and then focusing on the current situation, not thinking about what was wrong in the past, not worrying about the future, but appreciating the moment is very powerful, because it gives you a better perspective on now instead of anxieties about the past and the future. That's something that helps me, and I've had anxiety before.
Yeah. Going to that quote that you had of, the great thing about the future is that it comes the best and wait, hold on, say it again.
The best thing about the future is that it comes one day at a time.
Being a part-time runner, full-time fat guy, it kind of reminds me of my my non-co-host thing because she's a runner consistently, and when I would be struggling, to keep pace with her, to keep going, because we're trying to do like a 5-mile run, and I would be like, I don't know if I'm gonna make this. It would come out more like, I don't know if I'm gonna make this. But she would say, okay, you see that tree over there? No, not that tree. No, the other. And then I would start to wonder, why'd she pick a tree? There's a lot of trees here. But anyway, she would say, you see that tree over there, and eventually I'd get it. All we need to do is make it to that tree. And we'll just, and you can see how you feel when you get there. But right now, all you need to do is get to that tree. And once I got to that tree, I could decide then that if I wanted to take a walk for a bit, or if I could keep on going and had that energy. And sometimes it is helpful to not look at the finish line, to just see the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. I think people with anxiety are especially helped by that, by just the mindfulness of looking at one day at a time and being self-aware of these things, because anxiety can feel very overwhelming. I think that's a hallmark of anxiety, is feeling overwhelmed by the past, the present, the future, and taking that amorphous general anxiety away and actually looking at it, saying, okay, I'm anxious about this and this and this, is very empowering. I think that's why a lot of people journal as another form of meditation, because you physically put down what you're anxious about on paper, and suddenly it's no longer this big, just general cloud of anxiety. It's something physical that can be dealt with tomorrow because you've written it down.
Speaking of people with anxiety, we're about to get to a quick bit on goals, and then reading out that list from WTOP, so you don't have to click the link in the description, because I'm pretty sure none of you check our sources.
Probably not.
Yeah, so I know, so So I came across this article from Healthline, and I've come across a few from Healthline, and it's just a place called healthline.com. And it appears to be a place where just about anyone can write an article, from what I can tell.
Looks like it.
Yeah, this one is written by a woman, let's see, author. Yeah, the author is just listed as Christy is a freelance writer and mother who spends most of her time caring for people other than herself.
That's very vague.
Yeah. All right, so the title of this article is, For Many, Self-Care Makes Anxiety Worse, Not Better.
I hate that title.
I was intrigued by the title, and I thought, okay, tell me what you mean, Christy. And she's specifically, she's specifically addressing it in the view of someone suffering with anxiety. So, okay, first of all, so what's your takeaway from that title? Like,
pretty clickbaity and not supported by science.
Right, like you have to, like, okay, let's see what you're putting forward.
Because no science article I've seen has that conclusion. But putting my skepticism aside, I read it.
Yes. And what did you take away from it?
What she's talking about is self-care as seen on Instagram.
Right. See that little connection, ladies and gentlemen, to our social media episode?
Wow.
I'm so good at this. I don't need Andrew.
So now we're going to talk about why social media is bad.
Well, yeah, okay, so...
No, but why you shouldn't be listening to podcasts. No.
No. So, basically, I think it's more about what the view of self-care is.
Basically, that self-care has become trendy.
Right.
And so there's a misunderstanding about going and doing Pilates on top of a mountain while sheep graze in the background. It's very romanticized, and that's not at all what self-care is. It's much more mundane most of the time. Don't get me wrong, some people love going in a steamy room and doing yoga with a bunch of other fit people, and that's not bad. If that's your self-care, if that's what relaxes and restores you, go for it. But I think other people will read a book, watch a funny show, go out with friends. Self-care usually looks much more mundane. It doesn't look as romantic. So in this article, this person was trying the hashtag self-care methods, right, the things she thought were supposed to be good.
And the article puts forward an argument that sometimes self-care can exacerbate these feelings of guilt.
Yes.
Of what you're ignoring.
Right, because in this, she was trying to take an hour for herself, and all she could think about was that she felt guilty for taking an hour for herself.
And, as much as, it's too bad Andrew's not here to tell me, like, it's all about how you vibe, bro. But
it's all about how you vibe, bro.
Yeah, like I would say to that woman, well, it sounds like you're practicing self-care wrong.
It does. That's exactly what she's doing. And I'm like, you're forcing yourself to sit there for an hour, being anxious about sitting there for an hour. You're kind of defeating the purpose. But in this case, she was trying to emulate something without understanding why she was doing it and the purpose behind it. She was trying to emulate what she saw, but she kind of should have been emulating the idea of it. Mm-hmm. Basically, she knows herself. She knows what's restorative for her, relaxing for her. And she needed to try to do that. Not only that, in this case, this lady had some very strong underlying feelings of unworthiness, which no matter how long you spend by yourself is probably not going to help without a psychiatrist. But I mean, in this article, she was like, well, I didn't feel worthy of 10 minutes to myself. And I'm thinking, lady, you really need to see a psychiatrist, because that's a whole nother can of worms that is not going to be solved by you sitting there and meditating for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But in general, self-care is extremely useful for people with anxiety, people with depression, and understanding that you are worthy of that 10 minutes, understanding that you are a person who needs that self-care, who needs to be taken care of even by yourself, and that you are worthy of that. And taking 10 minutes out of your day to do that is incredibly helpful for mental health and gives you that energy you need to pour yourself out for other people, to take care of other people.
Right. So let's get to some self-care that you can practice in your everyday life. Now, we're going to preempt this with, it's the new year. It's a new you, but it isn't. It's a you that you're ready to work on, to build upon. And that means setting a goal. You've probably already said, I'm going to eat better. I'm going to get more sleep. I'm going to exercise more often. And all of these are good and great and admirable. And, I'm going to see my parents more often. I'm going to go out more often. But the thing is, just saying these things isn't really enough. And I'm sure you know that. Maybe you're telling yourself, I'm going to run 3 times a week. That's it. That's just what I'm going to do. I'm going to run 3 times a week.
And your baseline is never having run in years.
Right. And you're getting better to what a good goal looks like. Maybe you'll say, I'm going to run 3 times a week, starting with walking a mile and then jogging a mile and then walking another mile. And then I'll slowly start to build up to running most of that mile. And it's like, okay, that's better. It's progressive.
It's reasonable.
It's reasonable.
In terms of distance.
But it's still vague. Okay, so when are you going to run this 3 miles? There's a 5K in March, at the end of March, and that's when I want to be at running a full 3 miles or a full 5K. Cool, you now have a date, a specific date in mind. All of this goal is looking better and better and better. And it's a trademark of, what did you call it?
SMART goals.
SMART goals.
And for anyone looking at any types of goals, this is the best path to follow. Whenever I'm trying to reach a goal, short-term or long-term, I try to make sure it fits into this kind of formula, and it helps me make it reality.
Right, because something like, I'm going to start meditating this year, or I'm going to start going to the gym, don't kid yourself. Those are big things. That's a habit you're trying to start. So, SMART goals. I pretended like I didn't know what it was.
That's a lie.
Guest co-host, Kim, is not asking for help on this. So let's see what you got here. Specific. Yes, SMART goals are specific.
Instead of I'm going to run more, it's I'm going to run 1 mile.
1 mile. Yeah.
At this time of day, maybe after work on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays.
SMART goals are measurable because if you don't see progress in numerals, more than likely you're going to just start wondering, well,
it's too vague.
It's too vague. It's
you don't know when you've accomplished something.
There's no growth.
And you can't see it being accomplished. And when you don't see progress, it's really disheartening.
Yeah. So SMART goals are specific, measurable, and
attainable.
Attainable. Okay. So wait, does that mean R is still realistic? I feel like that's not it.
Realistic, relevant.
Relevant. Okay.
So they do pertain to your long-term goal.
Right.
Okay, so specific, measurable, attainable.
Attainable, right. You don't want to start out of the gate with, okay, I got specific down. I'm going to run 10 miles. Boom, done. No. So, we want to keep it realistic, which is what the R is.
Brings us into our next one.
But also relevant.
Relevant to your long-term goal, like getting healthier. So making sure it's a real step in the right direction.
Exactly.
The last one is time-bound. Like you started with, I'm going to run a 5K. There's a specific start date and a specific end date for that goal. These SMART goals tend to be really effective in making goals that are actually doable and aren't vague, amorphous things that at the end of next year you're like, oh, that 5K I wanted to run, I'll run it this year.
Right. So instead of like, I'm going to finish my novel this year, maybe you'll put a goal of, I'm going to write 5 pages a day, and then you'll start upping it to 7 pages to, I don't know how novel writing goes, to 10 pages, with the end goal of being, let's say, 500 pages by the end of May. It needs to be specific, measurable, realistic, relevant, and time-bound, and of course, attainable. I said that out of order, but I wanted to say it that way.
If you have any questions on that, just look at acronym for SMART goals.
Yeah. And do realize that you do have to respect it. While I do encourage rolling with the punches and not feeling like a total failure just because you missed a run session, don't let that happen more than once if you can. If you miss that session, you need to commit even harder to that next session.
That being said, my dad has a favorite saying, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You do need to have some resiliency. So, but like that actually fits in with what you just said.
Right.
You need to be able to pop back up as soon as you hit your first failure, and you will hit a failure, instead of just saying, oh, my goal is gone, I've destroyed it, I failed. There needs to be some, okay, so I'm going to do this better. This is how I'm going to fix it and do it differently next time. Pop back up. Keep going.
Kim, I think you've given yourself this speech a little too many times, I take it.
Yes,
Seems
I have.
Very rehearsed.
I have.
We do not have scripts here, people.
No.
And you said that
I do say it to
point.
myself a lot. And it helps.
Okay, so here we have, to wrap up the show, now that we've talked about self-care, how to, we've had a little bit of a gloss over creating goals. I wanted to talk about 10 New Year's resolutions for better mental health by WTOP, which was originally published in
News and World Reports?
U.S. News and World Reports, yes. So it starts out with focus on mental health, too, in the sense of also. So like I was saying before, we all have, we've probably all had things like, I'm going to join a gym, I'm going to eat better. I would say keep those things in mind still in relation to your mental health. And let's add to that.
This is kind of where the self-compassion goes and taking care of yourself mentally.
Right.
But yeah.
Get more sleep. I still battle with that.
Me too.
Yeah. So just a little tidbit. So I'm going to link to an article about sleep hygiene in the description. I highly, highly suggest you click on that one if nothing else. And if you're not familiar with the term, sleep hygiene, I mean, it's kind of what it sounds like. How conducive is your lifestyle to getting good sleep? Are you practicing? Are you washing? How conducive is your lifestyle to not getting sick? Do you wash your hands after you poop? Do you wash your hands after you handle meat? Things of that nature. So sleep hygiene generally is going to be stuff like no screens an hour before bedtime. Keep it dark. Keep it quiet.
Keep it cold.
Keep it as cold as you want it to be. Mm-hmm. Sometimes my non-co-host, she turns the temperature down to a point in which I cannot sleep. So I have to turn it up a little bit. And she'll even complain oh, my feet are too cold. And it's like, okay, well, you turned it down to 60, dude.
Exercise more.
Exercise more. So exercise more is a good example of not a SMART goal.
Yeah, well, none of these are SMART goals. They're more big goals you make into your own SMART goal.
Yeah. Now, so as far as my experience with exercise, I would say the article actually has a really good line here, which is instead of just committing to exercising more, a good method is to make exercise easier.
Oh, see, I feel like that's a very good method for pretty much any goal. Eating healthier, make things prepared.
Exactly. I put here eat better. And I'm going to kind of compare two things here. So for exercise more, something you can do is do things that you can do without necessarily joining or traveling to a gym or investing in expensive equipment. There are body weight fitness forums based on just what you can do with just your own body or even everyday household items. Yoga. There's Yoga of Adrienne on YouTube. It's completely free. She has a fantastic 30 days of yoga, which you don't have to do 30 days in a row. You can break it up into, every other day or every 3 days or so, or going for a walk.
Or taking your dog on a longer walk than you usually do. Both you and the dog will appreciate it.
That's right. Get a dog.
Actually, that does make people happier, but don't do that. Just
that's
be responsible dog owners.
And to relate it to like eating better, one thing I've started doing is when I go out and I buy vegetables, one thing that would happen is my broccoli, my bell peppers, they would shrivel up and get sad in my fridge. I never touched them. So now what I do is when I get vegetables, I bring them home and maybe I'll pack them up, but I make it a point to remember I bought them, and within either the day I buy them or the next day, I commit to I'm going to cut them all up. And so I cut them all up, and then I just have baby carrots, which I don't really have to cut up, and I put them in a big container, and they're there. They're within arm's reach. They're ready to eat. They're ready for me to grab to pack for a snack when I come home. And I need to make dinner, but I'm still hungry right now. They're ready for me to just grab right then and there to just start munching on. So that does basically make the healthy option easier, whether it's exercise or food.
Right. It's amazing how much difference that makes.
Yeah, exactly. So moving on, get a hobby. Now, honestly, when this sort of sounds like the really snarky response I get when sometimes I tell someone, I suffer from depression. Get a hobby.
Right.
I actually like this.
A hobby like taking antidepressants.
So quoting the article, there are two types of resolutions. One is to promote a sense of pleasure, and the other to build mastery in something. Finding a new hobby or going back to one you've let slide is a great way to do both. What's nice about a hobby is it's something that you can sort of take at your own pace, and it gives you a sense of accomplishment when you start mastering certain aspects of the hobby.
And that ties into the self-care. It's something that's yours, that isn't tied to making someone else feel better. This is just for you, time for you, either getting better at something or enjoying something.
Yeah, so get into puzzles.
I love puzzles.
Building
airplanes. For some reason, that always comes up with hobbies. I've never met a single person who builds airplanes, like toy airplanes.
Knitting.
A lot of people knit, though, yes.
Yeah. Pick up an instrument,
Drawing. Coloring.
Don't start with the French horn.
Oh, gosh. Your neighbors will not like you.
Yeah. No, but what I'm saying is, get a hobby, and you know what? If you really want to start with the French horn, more power to you. But again, remember, a SMART goal needs to be something that's attainable. So start with something simple, and realize that the key thing is to, look for. I think we're in a great era of hobbies as far as like the internet goes.
Oh yeah.
There's a whole lot of cool stuff you get into. There's a whole lot of weird stuff you get into.
Let's stick with the cool stuff.
But there's a whole lot of cool stuff you can get into.
That's a different podcast.
Yeah, okay. Put down your smartphone.
Yeah, that's a difficult one.
It is. I uninstalled Facebook on my phone.
Nice.
Yeah. Is there an app that you think you could uninstall on your phone?
Yes, there is. Probably Reddit.
Oh, that's a big one for me as well. Yeah. That should say not just put down your smartphone, but, close your screen.
Yeah. Although I did see the suggestion to only check your Facebook status every 20 minutes. Ladies and gents, if you are checking your Facebook status once every 20 minutes, 24/7, you might have a problem.
Okay, but here's the thing. Again, SMART goals do need to be attainable.
That's true. So if you are doing it more than every 20 minutes, limiting yourself to once every 20 minutes is a SMART goal.
Yeah, and maybe you can work yourself down to once every 2 hours.
Yeah, that would be much better.
Which would be big for somebody that's on their phone all of the time.
That's true.
Because let's be real, getting to a point where I uninstalled Facebook, that took a while, And the first couple of times, I installed it back in a day. And it's been off my phone for probably the latter half of this year.
Yeah, to be fair, that's what I just said was a little lightest. I am on Reddit way too much when I'm not doing anything else. Not when I'm working, not when I'm at a task, but when my free time, I do tend to go to that as the first thing.
Thank you, Kim. We do try not to alienate our audience here.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm not big on Facebook. Also, FYI, get outside some. Even if you go for a 10-minute walk, there are many studies that show that does great wonders for mental health.
Yeah, a little bit of sunshine, a little bit of nature, and getting back to get more sleep at a certain point
Oh, yes.
during the night. Remember that 2-hour rule we said? Make a specific stop time. You're you're gonna stop checking that particular app or stop looking at your phone.
That is a good idea.
Yeah, it is. Learn how to meditate. Now, I love how flippant this is just put into the list. Learn how to meditate.
Oh, why not?
Now, what I like about meditation is what you talked about earlier, which is mindfulness, which is what I think what they're talking about here when they say it can get you out of time pressures and help put a pause on the moment.
Well, I think a lot of finding joy, I think we mentioned finding joy in something. Finding joy can be finding joy in the moment. It can be hard to find joy when looking at all the pressures of life, but just taking a moment and looking at what is joyful in that moment can help you recognize the many good things in life.
Yeah.
That we often gloss over.
I would recommend, they say, like take 10 minutes. I would say if you're not using an app or if you're just trying to do it on your own, first of all, I would say it'd be helpful to maybe read something or watch a video on meditation to just kind of know what it is you're aiming for. And then second of all, I would say, unless it's guided meditation, I probably wouldn't initially aim for 10 minutes.
Try 5.
I would say even taking a minute out of the day to start with would be super helpful.
Also, if it seems difficult, then you're probably on the right path.
Yeah.
Meditation is not easy, but it is very worth it. The one point in life where I did meditate was incredibly helpful and helped me deal with a time in my life that was extremely stressful.
Get a planner. So, get a planner, I think, would be extremely helpful for anyone. A lot of people.
Yes.
Get
Yes.
it out of your head and put it on paper, or put it in your digital calendar. It can really help with organizing your thoughts, helping you with those SMART goals, making you stick to those specific times and dates. And I think it'll help a lot with someone who, like for me, with my depression, it's really helped me when I write it down. It helps me make a less vague commitment. It's like it's there, it's on paper, like it's an appointment.
Also, a bonus, it helps you when you are looking back several months and going, oh, I am better at that.
Yeah.
Or I did accomplish that. Again, it is much easier to focus on the negative than it is on the positive. And it's easy to remember the goals you failed at or didn't fully accomplish rather than the things that you did. So having something written down to look back at is really nice to see what you've accomplished so far.
Yeah, and for my non-co-host, my partner, for her, I think it helps a lot with her anxiety.
Yes, big benefit for anxiety.
And her ADHD. It's I put next to this, get a planner, start making to-do lists. Because that's something that I've committed to this year. I've already started practicing it this month, and that's one of the reasons why this episode's actually going to make it out on time, despite me not having my usual co-host.
Congratulations.
And I work in retail, and it's the holidays, and there's family. I had to visit lots of relatives. I had to visit, my partner's relatives. It's inventory time. There's lots of things to do at my job and my personal life. And I was able to tackle a lot of it because of putting things on the calendar, committing to that time slot, and making a to-do list and putting in perspective the things that I need to do, and it really helps when you have this, instead of this, like what you were saying, this vague amorphous blob of problems and obligations and pressures. Once you put it on a piece of paper in a little list, it's like, I can do this. And maybe, maybe toast bread is a little bit less important than visit my mom, So it helps you prioritize, and realize, make a game plan of sorts. So get a planner, make a to-do list, one or the other or both. There's lots of planners with little to-do list on the side. Speaking of putting things down on paper, keep a journal. That's something I think I'm going to commit to this year. Keeping a journal, it's some people think of it as like, well, my day planner is sort of a journal of things. Well, so journal, basically, think of it as sort of a self-therapist, if you will. To discuss a problem I had, and I think before when we were talking about it, Kim, you said that you sort of shared this issue with journaling. When I was talking to you about it before we started recording, my issue of keeping a journal is I was always afraid of it being found, whether it be by anyone, even a stranger or my kids or anyone who might stumble across it. So my writing was always very guarded, kind of almost even prose-like. It read more like a narration of my day than it did. You know, it had all this like vague thinking and description of my thoughts on things. And it was kind of like when I first entered therapy, I was just very, very guarded. And once I let that down, I started getting a lot more out of therapy. So it's kind of the same situation here. You know, when your journal should be a place where you are allowed to put your worries, your deepest, darkest fears, your concerns. You know, it goes back to that what you said. I like this. Quoting the article, use a personal journal to discharge your worries by writing them down. Rumination is the process of thinking obsessively about some negative feeling or emotion. It is often a symptom of anxiety and depression. Many people ruminate at night lying in bed. If you have a worry journal, write down those negative thoughts for no more than 15 minutes.
One thing I've heard from a therapist before was give yourself time to worry. So one important part of that is knowing you aren't just going to write down and forget it. Knowing that there is a time tomorrow, a specific time, that you are going to worry about all those things. And because you have that time, you can say, okay, I'm not going to forget this. There is a time I'm going to look at this, address it, plan, but it is not right now. Now
I'm
I
going to sleep.
Yeah. Right. Now I sleep. I express those thoughts so I can get them out of my head. And there will be a specific time tomorrow I can worry about them.
Yeah. And in your journal, you don't have to worry about being philosophical. My journal is probably filled with all kinds of words I make up, and you know, I'm not sure it practices the best grammar. I'm the kind of person that journalizes.
There you go. You just did it.
Yeah, throughout the day, you know, but that doesn't have to be what you do. You know, it could be as simple as 15 minutes of worrying, and then like another 15 minutes or a 5 minute. 5 minutes of gratefulness, and thinking about the positive things that happened that day.
I even keep a journal next to my bed, so if I wake up in the middle of the night and have something I worry about, I write it, then go back to sleep. And ending it with the gratefulness is an important thing too, because after you've just talked about things or just written down things that you're anxious about, remember the good things. Again, it's much easier to focus on the negative things in life than it is the good. And there's usually some good to be found.
Right. So, going out of order of the list, the next one was be grateful. And keeping a gratitude journal is definitely one of the things that they recommend. But sometimes being grateful can just be something that you do throughout the day. And I really like this part where they say that it doesn't have to be monumental. It could be something as simple as I got the coffee I wanted, or I caught the train on time. Or I got my favorite seat in class. It could be something you do throughout the day. It could be something you look back on. It could be something you focus on when times are getting a little tough. And it can also just be a mantra you repeat to yourself. Something that helps you keep that positive thought and also keep that gratitude. And why is gratitude so important?
I think it refocuses your frame of mind. I think when you're ruminating, again, that word of concentrating on and thinking of the difficult, the anxious things, that becomes your worldview.
And there's nothing to break it up.
No, but
that focus on what you're grateful for.
It breaks that worldview, and it helps you see the bigger picture. It is very hard to see the bigger picture when things are difficult or things are going bad, or when you're just an anxious person, and it's easy to focus on the negative. I think a gratitude journal is something that many people would benefit from.
Yeah, it's definitely something I struggled with before. This next one for me is very difficult as a very selfish person. Help others. I feel like people overestimate what they have to do for this, for help others.
Yes.
People think, man,
I haven't helped any orphans today.
I haven't gone on that mission trip to Guatemala. And it's like, okay, look, if you decide to do that, that's great. It really is. And I would never say that that's something you shouldn't aspire to. But kind of like that article of the lady with the whole self-care can, worsen anxiety thing. Don't compare yourself to that bar. Okay? Help others needs to be something, or it can be something that is practiced through you every day. It can be as mundane as opening the door for someone.
Because let's be honest, that kind of makes your day better when someone else does that. It's a little kindness that just makes it a little better. So if it would be something that helps your day be a little bit brighter, you can do that for other people.
Yeah, or offering help to a coworker when you've got a
heavy load yourself.
Well, I'm not sure why you would do that.
Oh.
Don't do that. That's going to make your workday worse.
Yeah, probably.
No, when you've got a lighter load for the day, you kind of, hey, things are a little bit easy, see if there's something that you can do for somebody else. I believe it's called prosociality, and it is a huge predictor of positive mental health.
That mantra of it's always better to give than receive is backed by science.
Yeah.
There's greater happiness by giving things, either gifts or gifts of time, than it is by receiving it. It's a better indicator of long-term happiness.
Right. And so just never think to yourself that you don't have something to give. There's always something for you to offer. You just have to keep it in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a while to train yourself. I mean, I really was a self-centered person for a while, and it was a manual job for me to look at opportunities where I could help somebody, because it'd be me and a friend, and someone would say, oh my gosh, like I just have so many things to do tomorrow. I gotta water the garden and walk the dogs, and my friend, like, without even a second thought, be like, I can water the garden. And in my mind it was just like, man, that sucks.
That really sucks, man. Good luck.
Which is a good thing to
Right.
to say, sometimes. But that offering of help, that just didn't occur to me,
It takes practice. It's natural to humans to be selfish. It takes practice to be kind.
Yeah, but I don't lose sleep over how I used to be, because I am, as this last recommendation says, I've learned to be nicer to myself. And you need to learn to be nicer to yourself. What was it you said earlier, Kim? 2 steps forward.
1 step back.
Don't fall into a pit of despair. Set your goals. Keep them in sight. Put them on the wall. Put them on your bathroom mirror. Put up words of encouragement. Keep them on your phone as your wallpaper screen. Keep them in mind.
And visualize.
Go ahead.
And visualize what those goals will look like when you accomplish them. Having an actual visual, an idea of what that means for you is important. So exercising, remember the goal is to be healthier, to not be ill, to be around for your loved ones. Remember the goal and why you're doing what you're doing. I think looking at the end goal is also helpful to things that are hard or long-term.
Right. When it feels insignificant, keep that big picture in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And when that big picture is overwhelming, just realize you just have to make it through this run session of running.
Again, the best thing about the future is that it comes one day at a time.
And when you miss one session, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, it's okay.
You're still progressing.
Commit to that next one. Okay? Things are going to happen. Life is not going to be perfect. Your life is not going to be a montage. And that's okay. You need to be nice to yourself. Don't compare yourself to television, to social media.
Yeah, I think if you give yourself the same compassion, for me, the best way to look at it was, what would I do if someone else were in this situation?
Yeah.
What would I say to them, and how would I encourage them? If I can then say that to myself, I usually find I'm far kinder to other people than I am to myself.
This is where something like journaling would come into play. Stop and reevaluate how it's going.
You might need to adjust your goals.
You know, maybe you're progressing and running faster than you thought. And it's really not that much of a challenge. You're barely breaking a sweat. So maybe you need to up the mileage or go for a faster pace. Maybe you've been experiencing a little bit of pain and you've missed the last 2 sessions. And you're starting to wonder, I'm not sure I can really run. So maybe you might have to do something a little bit less when I say less impactful,
Literally,
I mean
impact on the ground.
Yeah, right. You know, like cycling or swimming.
Or weightlifting.
Or weightlifting, actually, yeah. So don't be afraid to stop, reevaluate, and adjust. You know, and if that means changing the plan, that's okay. You know, you've already got a little bit of aerobic under your belt, so let's go to the spin class, you know, or maybe take the running to the dirt. You know, but be willing to change with it. But keep that larger goal in mind.
And don't feel bad about it. Again, same compassion to yourself.
Be nicer to yourself. Thank you, Kim, for joining me today.
Absolutely.
It's been a pleasure.
Same here.
Thank you all for joining us.
And Happy New Year.
I'm Sebastian.
This is Kim.
Be well. Mm-hmm.